Portsmouth's decision not to adopt the choice-based lettings model has been fairly controversial, and I think this story illustrates how we started to uncover information that told us that perhaps choice-based wasn't right for Portsmouth customers. This guy that we were dealing with in our waiting list by the name of Elvis, he was suffering with some physical disability. He had some facial deformity in addition to the limb problems that he had. He also had some learning difficulties, which meant that he couldn't really cope with decision-making processes. When he was asked to make important decisions about how his life would be, he really struggled with that, became very stressed, and his preferred approach would be to just not go down that route. And we were sort of looking at choice-based lettings and thinking, well, how would an internet-based advertising and bidding process actually help this person? And we couldn't really see how he could access that very well. And under the current, but under the previous allocations process that we had in Portsmouth, we would basically run a list of names who would be eligible for a property. And the people at the top of that list, the allocating officer would know quite intimately, really, would know all of their circumstances because they're dipping into those names all the time. And they would try and make the best allocation they could for the property based on that circumstantial priority and what they knew about those people. Elvis had a need to move because he was being victimised by the local community, the kids in the area. You know, the combination of learning difficulties and physical disability and also facial deformity meant that he was a target and he needed to move. But the problem was, every time the allocations process, the previous one, tried to contact him, he didn't return the phone calls. It might get as far as a viewing, but then he couldn't cope with the actual move. So as part of the systems thinking redesign process, which you do with live work, we took this case on board. We basically met with Elvis at a property, and the first thing we did was because we have no schedule of rates anymore in that redesign scenario, no time scales, we dropped all of those, no targets around time scales. We had a tremendous amount of freedom to be able to do what was right for Elvis. So the first thing we did was ask him, do you like the property? Is there anything that we need to do to this property to make it suitable for you? And you know, when you actually describe that question, a lot of people think, well, do you know what? They'll be asking for gold taps and they'll be asking for this, that and the other, and it hasn't been our experience that people do that. They actually look round the property and they might say to you, oh, well, you know, could you possibly paint the bedroom ceiling or something like that? It's always very minor, or move a kitchen unit. And sure enough, Elvis's demands were that basic and well within the remits of a voids and letting process. So we asked him, on your timescale then, Elvis, when do you want to move in? And the first thing we came across was his inability to make the decision. So we asked him, how much time do you need to make the decision? When do you contact us when you have had time to mull it over. And he was absolutely bowled over with that response because, of course, traditional lettings processes push you. You know, you've got to make your decision now and you've got to move in on Monday, that kind of thing, but not with Elvis. We gave him the time, he got back to us and said, yeah, I would like to move into that property, but I have no idea how I can actually cope with that, so perhaps I'd better not. Well, rather than putting Elvis back into the waiting list again as a failure, we explored what's possible in getting Elvis moved, what do we need to do to meet his nominal value and to get this property let. Because the purpose, the customer purpose for our voids process was to provide a suitable home when needed. Well, clearly we had a suitable home, and when needed would be on Elvis's timescale. Turned out that all we needed to do was pay for a removal company to get into his existing home, pack him up and physically move him. That was the thing that Elvis needed. And because we didn't have a schedule of rate cost, and because we're working in partnership with our suppliers, our service provider, as it were, it actually came in at the end of the process as being let well within any targets that were prescribed, although we're not using those targets, but just give you an illustration, it came in under those targets anyway, with that flexibility, and it also came in well under the contract cost. I think even with the removal costs, we turned that void round for about £400 or £500. And The biggest story, though, of course, is that human story, the effect that we had on Elvis's life, being able to take him out of that terrible situation, whereas previously he was just going around in a loop. And then we looked at that and we thought, okay, so how would choice-based lettings have helped this man? And we couldn't see it. That was one of the examples of where we couldn't see that adding value.